Okay, welcome everybody. It is just about time. It's 5 minutes past 4, so we're going to get started. So, very welcome. I'm very happy that you're joining us for this presentation on access arrangements and everything to do with the logistics of the exams on the exam day. I'll be presenting today with Mrs. Armstrong-Jones, our Armstrong-Smith, sorry, our exams officer, who I will hand over to towards the end of the presentation. So my name is Judit Coulehan and I am the Director of Learning Development here at Shiplake. So I am the school's SENCO, or Special Educational Needs Coordinator, and I am responsible for access arrangements. Now, everything that I will be explaining today and referring to comes from the national guidance that is published every year by the Joint Council for Qualifications. This is a set of rules that is updated every year, and it applies to all centres that conduct assessments. This particular document outlines the qualifying criteria for access arrangements and the general rules. And I'll be referring to this document throughout the presentation. So what are access arrangements? So access arrangements are reasonable adjustments in exams, special provisions made for students with special educational needs. Sometimes these are learning difficulties, but it can also be a physical disability. And they are aiming to help them participate in assessments on an equal footing with their peers. So these arrangements are designed to remove barriers to assessment, however, without changing the demands of the assessment itself. I will be coming back to this point about changing the demands of the assessment itself later on when I talk about practical exams or practical components of subjects such as art, drama, photography, PE, and various other subjects. So this is a visual summary of one of the guiding principles behind access arrangements, which is they are a set of adjustments that we can give to candidates to remove, yes, significant and persistent barriers to learning and assessment, but at the same time, I am responsible for making sure that we're not giving students an unfair advantage. And again, I'll be referring to this later on when we look at the most common types of access arrangements. So key principles of access arrangements. As I said a few minutes ago, the rules published by the JCQ, the Joint Council for Qualifications, they are updated every year. One of the most significant changes for this year is that the rules, the regulations emphasize that it is the centres, the exam centres' responsibility, in other words, the school's responsibility conducting exams, to make sure that those regulations, those guidelines are adhered to. And ultimately, it is the SENCO, and that's myself at Shiplake College, who is responsible for making informed decisions about access arrangements based on the JCQ regulations. So all these adjustments have to be decided at centre level, exam centre level, which is a school. And there is no appeal route. So the Joint Council for Qualification delegates this responsibility to us, special educational need coordinators. So access arrangements, they must reflect the student's normal way of working in all classroom activities, internal assessments, mock exams included. So they cannot be it cannot be something that we put in place just a couple of weeks before exams. Also, access arrangements are they are not blanket arrangements that are applicable to all subjects, but rather they have to be considered on a subject by subject basis. Different subjects, and that is because different subjects may require different arrangements. For example, and again, this has been emphasized in the guidance published for this current academic year, that additional time, or extra time as it is often referred to, is not appropriate in assessments or parts of assessments that are testing a practical skill. For example, students' ability to draw in art, or produce a piece of painting, or the practical aspects of PE when a sport is being assessed, because additional time is usually given for processing difficulties, cognitive processing difficulties, which have an impact on mainly the students' literacy skills, and therefore have an impact on their ability to perform in written exams. So we need to adjust the support to meet the specific subject demands. And another example of that is that the use of a scribe or word processing is not needed in maths. Most of the time is not needed in maths. Yes. So also, as I said, students should practice these access arrangements before the exams. In fact, it has to be their normal way of working in the lesson. So if a student needs some assistance with reading, the evidence has to come from the subject teachers confirming that that's how the student works in the various classes as well. Also, we need to review access arrangements and how the students use these access arrangements on a regular basis. And the regulations do state that access arrangements that are not used or not needed have to be reconsidered, and actually in some cases withdrawn. Now, this is very common that access arrangements change when students transfer from GCSE to GCE, or as it is commonly known, to A-level or sixth form study. So quite often, because they're going from 9 or 10 subjects to 3 subjects, and those 3 subjects play to their strength, not all the access arrangements that were in place at GCSE level will be needed at A level. And also, it's very, very important to emphasize that it is not only stated in the regulations that all centres have to follow them, but every centre is inspected by the Joint Council for Qualifications at least once a year. And when the inspectors come, we need to be able to show all the evidence, all the documentation based on which we authorized the various different types of access arrangements that are or might be in place for that particular student. So again, I have got a pictorial summary of that difficult task that I have, which is balancing the need between giving access arrangements in order for consistent and significant difficulties. And these are key words, persistent and significant difficulties. So these difficulties, and the regulations use these 2 keywords all the time, that they have to be, these difficulties have to be known to the centre, known to the subject teachers, known to the SENCO. So that's the persistent nature of it. And they have to be significant. So the students will have to be able to show a significant difficulty in the area compared to their peers. So I have to balance that need between removing these barriers, but also at the same time not giving an unfair advantage. In other words, when I don't have the sufficient evidence, then I cannot authorize these access arrangements. And like I said, we are inspected sometimes twice a year. These inspectors can come anytime after I make a formal application for access arrangements, so I have to ensure that all the evidence is in place before anything is finalised. Now, I would like to spend the next 5 minutes or so talking about the exam access arrangements process, first for GCSEs and then for A levels. It is a process, but I try to summarize it again pictorially. So, the regulations state that access arrangements for GCSEs or the evidence for these access arrangements has to come, so they have to come from no earlier than year 9. So here at Shiplake, we screen all our students in the summer term of year 9. Regardless of whether there is a history of difficulties or not. Not all schools do the screening, but because we are a very inclusive school and we do have a high number of students with an SEN history, in order to avoid missing anybody, we do use this online screener as the first step in the process of determining eligibility for access arrangements. I will be explaining this screener in a bit more detail in a few minutes. So we screen the entire cohort in the summer term of year 9. Now, this could be done earlier in year 9. However, our experience does show that the sort of true nature of the difficulties don't usually it's not usually obvious until either the very end of year 9 or even sometime in year 10. So that's part of the reason why we sort of slightly delay the screening. Then, if we see any below average scores in this screener, or teachers have raised concerns about this student, or there is a significant SEN history, which is the case for a lot of our students, or combination of these 3 factors, then we do further either group testing or one-to-one testing, and that usually takes place in the autumn and or the spring term of year 10. Then we also, sort of at the same time, we also have to collect evidence from the subject teachers of the student's normal way of working. So that's what NWOW stands for, normal way of working. Once we have all this evidence, and hopefully this gives you an idea of why the process is so lengthy, but once we gather all the evidence, then we put provisional access arrangements in place, always by the, if not before, by the end of the year 10 summer exams. So in year 10, our students sit internal exams at the end of the summer, and we send out the letters to you, the parents and the students as well, about their provisional access arrangements in preparation for these exams. We try to get this done either just before or just after Easter in year 10. Sometimes it's slightly delayed, but we try to get it done well in advance of the year 10 exams. And then during these year 10 exams, so in the June of year 10, I ask all staff to monitor their students, and if they feel that anything has been missed or they misjudged something earlier in the year when they gave us their subject teacher feedback, this is their chance at the beginning of year 11, so the autumn term or year 11, which is now until Christmas. It is their chance to maybe ask us to adjust the students' provisional access arrangements in order for them to be finalized by the January of year 11, which is when our students sit their mock exams for their GCSEs. Once everything is finalized, now we try to finalize the year 11's access arrangements and make the applications to the exam boards before Christmas in year 11. In fact, at the moment, this is all done for our current year 11s. So our current year 11s have their final access arrangements, and if I have any year 11 parents listening, you will have received an email from my colleague, Mrs. Lisa Bell, who is our school's access arrangement coordinator. So I oversee everything, but she does the bulk of the work, and she coordinates the whole process. But the final deadline to make an application to the exam boards is it's usually this day, the 21st of March, but sometimes there's a day out. So it's around that day, the 21st of March of year 11. So as you can see, it's a lengthy process, and quite often it's not worth trying to rush it, because, like I said, the level of difficulty quite often only sort of becomes obvious part way, I would say some way through the GCSE courses. So just to give an example, quite often we have students who have an SEN history, but maybe their history is their level of difficulty is quite mild. They are able and they developed good compensatory strategies. Therefore, when we reach out to their teachers, subject teachers in year 10, asking for feedback of normal way of working, no concerns are raised. And then later on, towards the end of year 10, once they do a couple of sort of past papers and start working more on past papers, and they sit this end of year exam, that's quite often when the teachers come to me and say, well, actually, I can see the need now. So that is why it's a lengthy process. Okay, now access arrangements for GCE or A level, same principles apply. However, when students transfer from GCSE to A level with existing access arrangements awarded for their GCSEs, so some of these access arrangements can be rolled forward without too much evidence. However, what is always required is confirmation from their current teachers, so that is the teachers in year 12, of the ongoing nature of the need, and the teachers confirming to us that adjustment, whatever was in place before, whether it's word processing, extra time, some sort of reading assistant, it is still needed. So they need to confirm that. And we need to have proof of what access arrangements were awarded at GCSE level. And that is an official document called a Form 8 or a Form 9, which we need to get from their previous schools. Now, in theory, these forms should automatically transfer with the students, but they don't always. So it usually takes us some time in the autumn term when the students first join us in year 12 to chase these forms, to go back to the previous setting and ask for these forms. Then we need to check that they were awarded. So we need to check if they still qualify for whatever was in place at GCSE level. Which is not always the case, because the regulations do change from year to year. And the rules that very specifically state that at GCE or A level, students, so the SENCO needs to make sure that the students qualify on the current set of criteria, in other words, on the updated rules. However, the good news is that there are some lower level access arrangement, for example, word processing with spell check disabled, the use of rest breaks, prompter, noise cancelling earplugs, and there are others that can be carried forward so long as it is the student's normal way of working. So in other words, if we see any evidence, and that usually comes through the Form 8 and the Form 9, that they have been typing for a number of years, that carries forward automatically. Extra time doesn't. That's the exception. So again, sort of like a pictorial summary of the process is here. So if students join us with existing access arrangements, that is with their Form 8 or Form 9, that has to be reviewed, and we need to make sure that they still qualify on the current set of rules. This is usually a very important one for extra time. Then teacher evidence is still needed from the new setting, from the new teachers, to confirm the ongoing need. So that needs to be collated from the sixth form teachers. Then provisional access arrangements are put in place by the end of the year, end of year 12, by the end of the summer exams. Now, this is for the students who are doing the traditional linear A levels, because they don't sit any exams until the summer term of year 13. However, we do have lots and lots of students who sit exams early, so in sometime in year 12. Those are students who are doing the vocational courses, the BTECs and the CTECs. Now, students who are doing the BTECs and the CTEC courses, they do sit exams from as early as November of the year 12. So all of this, all of the above applies, but unfortunately, you can see that time is very, very tight for us to make sure that everything is in place by those early exams. We always do it, but the application deadline for access arrangements for the year 12 students for these early exams is the 21st of October of the year 12. So that is 6 weeks from the day the date they join us. Very quick turnaround. Yes. The process then is very similar to what happens at GCSE level. So for those who are doing A-level courses, they have their provisional access arrangements in place by the end of year 12. If needed, adjustments can be made after the internal exams in year 12. So we make those adjustments in year 13, and everything is finalized by about now, Christmas time, but the latest, the 31st of March of year 13. I forgot to say at the beginning of my presentation that please feel free to use the Q&A function and submit your questions if anything that I'm saying doesn't make sense, or you need clarification, you've got a question that I haven't answered throughout my presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions, and I'm hoping, I'm just glancing at the clock, I'm hoping that we will have about 20 minutes at the end to answer these questions. Right, the most common adjustments in exams. Okay, so well, I thought it's easier to think about the difficulties first, what sort of difficulties students face and what the typical adjustments are. Now, I put typical adjustments because these are the most common adjustments for these difficulties. But of course, you know, everybody, all the students and their needs are looked at on an individual basis, so there will be variations. So one of the most common need is difficulties with focus or maintaining concentration. That is quite often as a result of having ADHD. A recommended adjustment is to use supervised rest breaks, because it allows the student to take a break away from the paper, and if they need a physical or movement break, they can do that. They can just walk around for a few minutes and resume when they are ready to resume. I will be talking about all these adjustments in detail in a minute. Handwriting, quite often students have difficulties with handwriting speed and or legibility. So the typical adjustment is allowing the students to word process, but it has to be with spell check disabled. Spell check can only be enabled if, and that's the last point here, if the student's spelling is indecipherable, which means that we literally can't make out what they are trying to say. It's not phonetically plausible. If it is phonetically plausible, then it's just a standard word processing with spelling disabled. Quite often students have difficulties with recalling information at speed, and the adjustment for that is extra time. However, very strict qualifying criteria applies to extra time. Students can and often have difficulties with sequencing or organizing, sequencing their ideas. Word processing with spelling off and or extra time can help in this case. Sometimes students just generally have a great difficulty with the thought to paper process. They just find it difficult to articulate their ideas on paper or sort of in writing. So again, word processing with spell check disabled and or extra time is these are adjustments that we can consider. Reading difficulties, either with reading accuracy and or speed or understanding questions. There are different types of reading help that we can offer, or sometimes if they only have a difficulty with reading speed, then extra time might be the answer. Unfortunately, some students do have various mental health conditions, in which case an alternative rooming arrangement can be helpful. I will again be explaining this in detail in a few slides. Noise cancelling headphones or noise cancelling earplugs, those are quite good to use, or alternative seating, like at the back or the side of the main exam hall, or maybe in a booth at the back of the exam hall. So these are just various adjustments that we can think about. Physical disability, it can be, for example, a temporary injury to the dominant hand, the writing hand, or various other physical disabilities. And when it comes to physical disabilities, it's really just has to be looked at on a very individual case-by-case basis. Access arrangements fall into two distinct categories. One category is called center delegated access arrangements, and the other category is access arrangements that are subject to quite stringent qualifying criteria, and they require an application, a formal application to the exam board, who then have to either approve it or not. So what is the difference between the two? Well, and these are not in the right order. So first of all, I have to be confident that there is a genuine need for the arrangement that we're applying for. In other words, going back to the first couple of slides, I need to make sure that there is a significant and persistent difficulty or need related to the area for which I'm asking for an adjustment, and that applies to both of them. Teacher evidence of normal way of working in the classroom is also needed for both, but the difference is that below average scores, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, below average scores gained through internal assessments are only needed for access arrangements that require a formal application to the exam board. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of the most common examples of center delegated access arrangements. Top of the list is word processor or typing with spell check off or spell check disabled, supervised rest breaks, use of a prompter, a reading pen, smaller room or alternative rooming arrangement, as it is called, coloured overlays, coloured or enlarged papers, noise cancelling headphones, they must be non-electronic, bilingual dictionary, or read aloud. I will be talking about each one of these separately. The access arrangements that are subject to, as I keep sort of emphasizing this stringent criteria and that require exam board application and approval, are 25% extra time, more than 25% extra time, which needs to be considered in increments, and it can only be given in very rare and exceptional circumstances. And actually the qualifying criteria for this and the level of evidence needed is well, I was going to say outstanding. There's a lot of evidence that's needed for this. Therefore, it's very, very rare. Using a scribe or speech recognition software or word processing with spell check on, these three are interchangeable, which is why I put them as one category. But again, subject to strict criteria. And use of a reader, this is a human reader, or a computer reader, again, same, requires an application and quite strict qualifying criteria. Now, so we're going to look at these most common access arrangements one by one. Just for reference, I I'm highlighting at the top of each slide the relevant section of that document, the access arrangements and reasonable adjustments document published by the JCQ, which is available online. So if you just type in access arrangements 2024-25, it will take you to the PDF document. So it is a public document available to anybody. So the rules around supervised rest breaks, they are described in or outlined in section 5.1. So why do we give supervised rest breaks? As I sort of alluded to earlier, they provide a break from exams for the students with significant difficulties, for example, ADHD, autism, and some physical needs when they need a break away from the paper. Eligibility, so students with disabilities affecting concentration, stamina, or physical need. What's the process? So, as I said, I need to confirm that there is a genuine need, and this is the student's normal way of working, and that comes from feedback gathered from the teachers. So in other words, the teachers will have to say something along the lines of, I can confirm that X requires regular movement breaks in lessons to allow him to refocus, for example. Or X requires regular brain breaks, so not necessarily something that involves physical activity, just brain breaks or break from the work to I don't know, to allow him to refocus or to improve his written outcome. But I need to have some evidence from the teachers. And it is not enough to have evidence from just one subject teacher. However, now, so there is no need for specialist evidence, but a diagnosis of a related need, for example, ADHD, is preferable. So in other words, if this is a persistent and significant difficulty that we can see in school, but that there isn't a formal diagnosis, that's okay. However, if there is a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, that is much easier to put in place. Now, the regulations changed with regards to supervised rest breaks this year, and so in the past they said the JCQ said that students can take a break whenever they want, and it can be for as long as they want it to be. That has now been removed from the regulations. In fact, the regulations emphasize that the centres need to decide on how long the students can take a break for, and how frequent the breaks can be, and how many breaks a student is allowed in total. And this all needs to be decided well in advance of the final exams. So we think that if a candidate uses up to 25% of their exam time for supervised rest breaks, that is fair. So an example of that would be, or up to 25%, I should say, of their exam time for rest breaks, that is fair. So an example of that would be in a 2-hour exam, up to, and that is important, they don't need to use, well, any of it if they don't need it, but they don't need to use all 30 minutes, but up to 30 minutes can be used for breaks. What about the frequency of the breaks? Well, maximum 4 supervised rest breaks per exam or per sitting is enough, except I would say if there is a medical need. Now, obviously, if there is a medical need that says otherwise, that will be considered. But I need to know about that significant medical need, and it needs to be accompanied by the relevant documentation. Now, again, as I sort of explained a little earlier, that supervised rest breaks can be movement breaks, or simply the student can simply take a rest whilst staying seated at their exam desk. So they can just close the paper and take a mental break, or if they choose to go on a movement break, it is called supervised rest breaks because the invigilator will have to accompany them on the break. And the invigilators also need to make sure that it's not used as a additional thinking time, because that would be considered as giving an unfair advantage to a student. So usually they sort of engage the student in a little bit of chit chat, just to make sure that they're not walking around for 5 minutes and using that as additional thinking time. Quite often, if students have ADHD or autism or obsessive compulsive disorder, we also recommend that they use a prompter. Now, a prompter is simply an invigilator who will sort of give prompts to the students to move on. What we want to prevent is students with, for example, inattentive type ADHD to sort of go off task and start looking out of the window and sort of daydream, and then valuable minutes go past not focusing on the paper. So, as it says here, the purpose is that it helps the candidate to stay focused on answering the questions and moving on to the next one. Again, no formal application is required because it's a center delegated access arrangement, but, there has to be evidence that there is, so this is a significant need, and this is also what is being done in the lessons. So the teachers need to say, I do prompt X on a regular basis to I don't know, to allow him to refocus or move on, or yeah. Examples of use. So, for example, student with ASD, the prompter can remind the candidate of the time left. So simply can say, 15 minutes left, or simply put place a card, a laminated card on their desk, which says half an hour left, then 15 minutes left, then 10 minutes left. But that's just an example. A student with obsessive compulsive disorder, the prompter can tap on the desk to help the candidate to move on from the question, so that they're not stuck on trying to perfect question number 1. ADHD, the prompter calls the candidate's name to refocus their attention. This is obviously done in a subtle way. Sometimes it's a tap on the shoulder, whatever the candidate prefers. 25% extra time. So this is the one that I get the most questions about. So 25% extra time. So there is a difference. So 25% extra time is different from supervised rest breaks. 25% extra time is specifically for candidates who need more time to complete their exam. So not for candidates who need a break from the exam paper. This is one of those formal access arrangements where the qualifying criteria applies and a formal application has to be made to the exam board. Who is eligible? So to be eligible for 25% extra time, the student needs to have a current educational health and care plan, or statement of special educational need, as it used to be called, and this needs to be written in their EHCP, or the student need a fully completed Form A, so that is the official document listing the student's access arrangements, or with an assessment from year 9 or later. Now, the evidence of need. So for 25% extra time, I must show that the student has a substantial impairment with at least 2 below average standard scores, and I will explain standard scores in a minute. So below average standard scores, which means 84 or less, or 1 in the below average range, so 84 or less, and 1 in the low average range, that is 85 to 89. And the scores must relate to 2 different areas of speed of working. In other words, if a student has slow handwriting speed, so below average score, let's say 83 in handwriting, and another below average score 84 related to reading, that is fine, and they can get extra time based on that. However, if I am compensating for the writing difficulty by allowing word processing, I am taking away the need for the writing component. So I can't use that slow handwriting score for extra time. And equally, if I am helping the student because I provide some sort of help with reading, that score cannot be used for extra time either. So it is quite complicated. I must provide detail of the candidate's difficulties and the support in place. And I have to ensure before I make the application that all the documentation is complete and current. So I need to have those scores and teacher evidence as well. And when it comes, so that's GCSE level. And when it comes to A level, I need to make sure that the students had extra time at GCSE level, which will be detailed on that document called the Form 8. And that can be rolled forward as long as the student still qualifies on the current criteria and the teachers can evidence the continued need for 25% extra time. Now, so I'm going to pause here for a minute and just explain what evidence we need for persistent and significant difficulties. I always find it helpful to explain it this way, that there is a complete reset in year 9. I often get the questions from parents whose children transfer from primary schools or prep schools with existing access arrangements, say, why can't they have extra time in year 9? And that is because the regulations say that anything that was in place before year 9, so any previous access arrangements, are considered unofficial. Well, they are certainly, we're not allowed to use them as sort of formal evidence to make an application for 25% extra time for GCSEs, but they can contribute to building a picture of need. So when I talked about I have to prove that there is a significant and persistent difficulty, in this case related to speed of working, if the student had 25% extra time in, let's say, year 6, 7, and 8, that is building that picture of need. That is proof for the difficulty being persistent, but it's not enough. So it's more just a history. And then, of course, eligibility for extra time especially is based on below average scores from internal testing. So that is testing carried out by the school. So scores from privately commissioned educational psychologist reports or diagnostic assessments, typically for dyslexia, cannot be used as direct evidence for access arrangements. Again, they are only they can only contribute towards building the picture of need, sort of saying that, yes, this has been a difficulty for some time. And then the below average scores, they need to come from internal testing. But again, even if we have those below average scores, those scores alone are not enough. That needs to be supported by a teacher evidence of normal way of working in the classroom. So I mentioned about 10 minutes ago that we screen all our students at the end of year 9 just to make sure that we don't miss anybody. And we use this online test called the Lucid Exact Screener, which is a bit like a dyslexia screener because it assesses areas of literacy. As you can see, it looks at word recognition, how good the students are at recognizing words out of context. It looks at reading comprehension accuracy and speed as well, so how accurately they can read and then answer questions, comprehension questions, and how quickly they can do that. Spelling, handwriting speed, and of course, we also look at legibility through this, handwriting legibility and typing speed. Now, so it assesses these areas of literacy. However, this test also tests processing speed and working memory indirectly. Why? Because if you have difficulties with working memory, in other words, remembering information very short term so that you can do something with that information. Typically, when you're reading a text, working memory difficulty would be not remembering by the time you finish the text what you read about at the beginning. Therefore, you need to go back and reread it. Now, if that's the case, that is going to have an impact on your reading comprehension speed if you have to reread parts of the text for meaning to understand what it is about. And also, of course, reading comprehension accuracy. So if you are not answering the questions accurately, that can be down to either a working memory difficulty or difficulties with vocabulary or even decoding skills, so ability to read words accurately. The results are given in standard scores. Now, standard scores are comparing the performance of the students to their peers of the same age in the UK. So they were standardized on a British sample. So it's basically establishes a ranking order, and the average range, the numbers are small here, but the average range is between 85 to 115. 3/4 of our population falls somewhere within the average range. 100 is standard average, and then anything above that, we're very happy with that. Anything below that is okay. Now, once students' results are in the below average range, in which case these columns turn orange. So if they are somewhere here, they'll turn orange. Then we will do further either group or one-to-one testing to look into that particular area, because it might be an indication of a difficulty in that area. So now, it happens quite a lot that pupils with just below average or borderline scores when they were younger in these areas, they now produce scores something like this, because of course they are developing, they are learning, their skills are improving. So it happens that sometimes when students are diagnosed, for example, with mild dyslexia, when they are in year 4 or year 5, and some of their scores in these areas are maybe in that orange zone, in that below average zone, but not far below, just a little bit below. By the time they do this screener, their results actually are well within the average range, in which case we, particularly if there is no teacher concern either, we cannot do any further testing, because if we then go away and do further testing, that is considered as malpractice, because it is perceived as looking for difficulties, which is not allowed. Word processing with spell check disabled, I did talk about this quite a lot. So this is one of those easier access arrangements to allow. So long as if we can see a difficulty where the student's handwriting is illegible, or their handwriting speed is in that below average area, and or their spelling is indecipherable, or they have a medical or physical condition that affects their handwriting, and typing is their normal way of working, we can approve that. We can approve word processing with spelling disabled. So as I said before, the spell check function has to be disabled unless their spelling is both in that below average range, but quite significantly below average, and phonetically indecipherable. I have to emphasize that it cannot be granted. So word processing or typing cannot be granted for preference, or because the student can type faster, or because they use it at home. That's not the qualifying criteria. We do conduct timed handwritten assessments, usually. So in the subjects that require more written answers, I ask the teachers to conduct these assessments per half term, particularly with our younger students, because I need to have evidence for word processing if that's what they need. But equally, once it has been authorized and we know that this has been the student's normal way of working, for example, typically by the time students transfer to year 12 or come to us for year 12, if we know that it's their normal way of working, it can just carry on. And so students in the sixth form who do BTECs and CTECs, their courses have something called a non-examined assessment, or NEA, which is basically coursework type assessment. And the rules are a bit different in these assessments. They can use word processing as standard practice. So word processor is standard unless prohibited in these exams, but it is usually standard practice. And spell check is allowed in these coursework assessments, but the normal arrangements apply to other exams. So what it means is that sometimes we are in a situation that a student does a combination of BTEC and CTEC courses and one A-level. And whilst they type in their BTEC and CTEC subjects, because coursework can be typed in those exams, they are then under the impression that they can type in their A-level subject as well, or in the actual exam of the BTECs and CTECs. That is not the case unless they qualify for word processing anyway. So I just have to sort of emphasize that difference. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes that is the case. Scribe, spelling, speech recognition technology, and word processor with spelling enabled. So as I mentioned before, these are interchangeable. So what I would like to emphasize here is two things. So the spell check can only be enabled if the spelling is unrecognizable. Also, we encourage our students to be independent. And of course, in their lessons, students type. Now, students whose spelling is really poor, they would type with spelling enabled anyway. So we encourage our students to use that adjustment rather than a human scribe, because that's their normal way of working in lessons. They're typing with spelling enabled, and that's the way forward as well when they go to sixth form and then later on to university or the world of work. They are unlikely to have someone sitting next to them scribing for them. So we are definitely trying to encourage our students to not to rely on human scribes. However, of course, there are exceptions. Sometimes that is the only or that is the most reasonable adjustment. Yes, I mean, scribes in the exam can handwrite or type, can draw maps and graphs if it's described by the student, but they can't scribe the skill that's being tested, and so on. So there are some quite specific instructions when they use a human scribe. Now, I also have to emphasize some of the restrictions. When students use a human scribe, well, a human scribe is not allowed in modern foreign languages unless the candidate can dictate each foreign word letter by letter, which, as you can imagine, that's just a very time-consuming, very tiring. Not sure how productive it is. So usually what happens, even if the student uses a human scribe in their other subjects, if they also do a modern foreign language, they tend to type or handwrite their answers in the modern foreign language, and they get a bit more extra time for that. And of course, in subjects assessing the quality of written communication or spelling, punctuation, and grammar, marks are awarded only if the candidate demonstrates the skill being assessed. So which means that a simple example, if a student uses a human scribe in an English exam, then the marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar, definitely for spelling and punctuation as well, are taken away unless the student dictates the spelling of each word letter by letter. So this is just something to be aware of. And again, that's another reason why I encourage students to opt for word processing instead. Read aloud and examination reading plan, although they are under one category in the JCQ regulations, but they're two very different things. So read aloud means that helps the candidates who struggle to understand text by hearing themselves read. So students read aloud to themselves because it helps them with understanding, with comprehension. This is quite rare. Not many students use that adjustment. And again, it must reflect the candidate's normal way of working. So it has to be what they do in their lessons and assessments as well. But because it's very disruptive to other students, they sit in a separate room. Examination reading pen. Now, so this is we use a device called OrCam, and I attached a little video here, which is available on YouTube. So OrCam is quite a cutting edge reading pen that is an optical character reader. So it takes a photo of a whole page of text, or you can take a photo of a smaller section like a paragraph or a column, and it's just a text-to-speech function. It reads everything back to you. So students can use that so long as it is disconnected from Wi-Fi and it doesn't have any inbuilt dictionary, thesaurus, or data storage. But the advantage of using a reading pen as opposed to a human reader is that these reading pens are permitted in papers testing reading. For example, the GCSE English language, the reading section of the GCSE English language paper. In that part of the exam, a human reader is not allowed because the intonation can aid comprehension. So, in other words, depending on how the human reader emphasizes certain words, it can give the candidate an unfair advantage. And of course, the reading section of the English language GCSE tests reading ability, so we mustn't aid comprehension there. But the reading pen is allowed because it's slightly more robotic. It's a software. It's speech to, or sort of text to speech technology. So we definitely encourage our students for that reason as well, because they can use it in English where they need it most, I would say, to use a reading pen rather than a human reader. Yes, and I've sort of explained about the human reader, so I won't go into much detail about that. Now, so this is the last big access arrangement that I sort of wanted to spend a little bit of time on. So there are lots of other types of access arrangements that are center delegated, and I listed them here. For example, color naming by the invigilator for colorblind candidates, colored overlays. So they are plastic sheets that go on text, and they help students with visual or tracking difficulties. Sometimes it's referred to as visual dyslexia, and it sort of calms the page down, helps the students with tracking, seeing the text clearly. Examination or colored or enlarged paper, fidget toys or stress balls. They are allowed. Non-electronic ear defenders, earplugs, and non-electronic headphones. The optical character reader is the device that I described, that reading pen. A new one this year is a timer on the candidate's desk. So some students have real difficulty with sort of trying to locate where the exam clock is in the hall, or they just prefer to have something on their desk. That is fine. And the other one is alternative rooming. Now, this is quite often referred to as separate room or smaller room. So there is a huge difference between smaller room, which is for a group of candidates, can be up to 20 students in a room with similar difficulties, and one-to-one invigilation, which is the student having their own room. Now, both of them come under the category of alternative rooming, and the criteria is that they are for candidates with serious medical conditions or significant behavioral issues that must be known to the center and reflect their normal way of working. Now, I always say that, and I know that my colleague, the exams officer, will talk about this in a bit more detail, that actually the quietest exam venue is the sports hall. Because although we do have these smaller rooms where, let's say, we would have a group of students with a diagnosis of ADHD who need slightly more frequent movement breaks, but because they in that room there could be students sitting completely different exams of different length, there is quite often almost constant coming and going because they are starting, finishing at different times. They are going for their rest breaks, coming back from their rest breaks. They might be, tapping the table because they've got that difficulty, slightly kicking the table leg. So I would say that it's smaller room is it's something that we do need to discuss with the students and just highlight that's not a solution for everybody. And one-to-one invigilation, so having your own room, is really reserved for students with significant difficulties that would actually have an impact on the rest of the cohort. So in order to avoid disrupting the rest of the cohort, we put them in one-to-one rooms, but it is rare. And you can see a couple of examples here. So for example, epilepsy or diabetes, I would say the less well-controlled epilepsy and diabetes, students who are prone to seizures. So for example, if we know that a student is prone to seizures, in order to avoid disrupting the exam for potentially up to, I don't know, 50 other students, we put them in a separate room. Or misophonia, which is an extreme sensitivity to noise, and can trigger quite strong reactions, which again can be disruptive to the rest of the cohort. So we probably we would think about putting them in their own room to minimize disruption. Now, the last thing I think from me is that all this is summarized in our various policies, which are available on the website. So under parent information, policies and documents, you can find lots and lots of policies. The access arrangement document summarizes everything that I have outlined today. The access arrangement guidelines is a guide for students who have been authorized some access arrangements, how best to use these access arrangements. But this is something that we also discuss with the students on the one-to-one basis. And you can also, of course, find our SEND, Special Educational Needs and Disability Policy, and our word processing policy. So, gosh, I've forgotten that I've got the the summary points as well. So I just want to emphasize these 5 things. So access arrangements, the whole process of determining eligibility for access arrangements needs to be triggered by evidence of need in the classroom. In other words, it is the teacher's responsibility to raise their concerns to me if they have any concerns. We actually do screen our students, which a lot of schools don't do, but we do that because of the kind of inclusive school we are and the level of, or the sort of number of students with special educational needs. So we don't want to miss anything. We're being actually very thorough. And of course, as I emphasized at the beginning, it's myself and Mrs. Bell, my colleague, who investigate the eligibility, or sort of determine the eligibility based on internal assessments and SEN history and evidence of need in the classroom. Access arrangements must be based on the current need. So again, previous history of SEN or access arrangements, they serve as guidance but do not prove eligibility for access arrangements for formal exams, so GCSEs and A-levels. Yes, we do the screening, and then we do further one-to-one assessments if needed. But there is also a limit to the number of assessments we can do. In other words, we cannot keep on testing until qualifying scores are found. When we suspect a difficulty, we have access to lots of different tests, and we do the ones that are considered the best ones and quite widely used up and down the country in every centre, but it is not the case of, we haven't found the scores yet, so we're just going to be doing more testing. We can't do that because that is considered malpractice. And of course, I explained the eligibility evidence that particularly for extra time, yes, we need to fulfill those specific requirements outlined in the JCQ handbook. And of course, yes, we're inspected. Every school is inspected at least once a year. And if we don't get it right, if we put in access arrangements based on insufficient evidence, it will constitute malpractice, and that does risk the candidate losing their grades or being sort of downgraded in their assessments. And that is from me. I will have a look at your questions at the end of the presentation. However, I am going to hand over to my colleague, Mrs. Armstrong, who will tell you about how this works on the day of the exam.
Thank you, Judith. I'm hopefully going to take control of the presentation now. Yeah?
Yes, I am going to give you control. Yeah, there you go.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, my name is Lindsey Armstrong. I am the exams officer at here at Shiplake. I am just going to literally, if I can find which, I can't work out how to move to the next screen. I'm not going to, oh, there it is. I'm not going to take up too much more of your time this Friday evening. I'm just going to go through what just the general way of that we run exams here. The first thing to say, and this is for you to go back to your children, good preparation is the key to everything, as I'm sure everybody's aware of that. Black pen, not blue. There's lots of reasons why. Most of them, the biggest reason is that all of the papers are scanned through, and blue sometimes doesn't come through when they're scanned and then sent off for marking. An HP pencil for drawings, please don't let them write the whole of their exam with a pencil, because again, scanning doesn't come through very clearly. A calculator, protractor, compass, ruler, all those things, this isn't an exhaustive list. They will know what they need for each exam. A transparent pencil case, it has to be transparent because we need to be able to see what's inside it. So things like the tin geometrical sets that they can get, we'd need those to be taken out, just everything taken out of the tin and put into a pencil case. And again, water in a transparent bottle, any labels need to be removed. These aren't my rules. These are the board rules, and so for that reason, we have to adhere to them. Thank you, Judith. I can't imagine to be able to be doing this. Do not bring mobile phones. The bane of any exam officer's life is a mobile phone. Any type of wristwatch. The rules changed a couple of years ago. No smartwatches, but now no wristwatches because they're becoming more and more sophisticated in how they look like normal wristwatches. Any type of earphones or headphones, unless, as Judith said earlier, that they have noise cancelling headphones, but they need to be approved. Any internet enabled device. That also this year means smart glasses. I'm not going to go into too much detail of those because I don't want to suggest you get them because I wouldn't even know how to notice a pair of smart glasses, but they're not allowed either. And any handwritten notes, we will always ask children to check their pockets as they come into the exam room. Please don't let them have notes on them. Water bottles that we cannot see through, they're also not allowed, and we won't be allowing them to keep the water bottle on their desk. As I said, the list isn't exhaustive, and every year more and more items are added to the list to the point where it's actually getting easier for me to tell them what they can bring, not what they can't bring. Thank you, Judith. Malpractice, it's not something that we actively want to find any student doing, is having something that they shouldn't have on them. That's not the whole of my team is there to support the children, but obviously we also have a job to do. If a child doesn't follow exam staff instructions, the penalties will range from a warning through to disqualification for consistent or persistent non-compliance. they're not supposed to communicate with other candidates once they're into the exam room. This also is through from a warning to disqualification. This is quite a new one, actually. Writing obscene material on a script will immediately be picked up and will be sent back to us. Boards are quite strict on this now, and they will lose marks for that unit through to disqualification of the subject completely, depending on how often they write obscene material on the front of the script. And a mobile phone is actually almost always disqualification, whether or not the intention is to use it. So if it just must be not on them at all. And thank you, Judith, if you wouldn't mind.
Next slide from COVID times.
Yeah, back to the pandemic. Our priority has been and always will be your child and their well-being. That never changes. I am always around, and I am always there to help the children if they feel unwell or nauseous before their exam. It is generally nine times out of 10, it's just nerves. But please ask them to come up to the exams office and have a chat with me. I sit above the sports hall. Or by all means, just feel free to give me a call if you feel that your son or daughter is out of sorts on any particular morning. We'll just make sure that we keep a very close but unobtrusive eye on them so they won't know. In the past, in previous schools, I've had children who have been sniffing, tapping their foot. I've even had one that used to hum, and it's really distracting to the people around them. Let me know immediately. There's nothing I can do after the event, especially during the main exams. I cannot help a child if they come to me in August at results and say, yeah, but the boy next to me was tapping his foot all the time. If I know about something at the time, I can make allowances for it. I can move the foot tapper, or I can move the people that it's distracting. Individual circumstances are always taken into account by the exam board, and can always use what is called special consideration, depending on whether it's necessary or not. It needs to be a significant event that affects a child at the time of the exam. Colds, headaches, period pains for girls, hay fever, mild hay fever is not acceptable by the boards, and they won't gain any marks for it. Some children have to put up with a lot during their exam years, and unfortunately things happen. Grandparents become ill and may pass away. Pets that you've had for the whole of your child's life may die. And that's the kind of thing that I would always put through for special consideration. The most that you will get, and they have to have a criteria, and unfortunately it sounds quite clinical. A child will only get 5% of the marks available on a paper if one of their parents dies during the exam season. That sounds very clinical. You won't ever get more than 5%, and that is for the most severe cases. So we're looking at 1 or 2% for most, and that's of the whole of the exam paper. So on a paper that's worth 100 marks, they might, if it only get a couple of marks extra. So whenever they tell you that they're going to all come out with grade 9 and they'll get 40% extra, please don't believe them. Come and ask me. My team are there all the time to look after the children. That is almost the main point, that we're there. I have a very strong team, and I've just got another 10 people who will be joining us in the new year, many of whom have already invigilated in other schools. They have to pass every year online training courses that look at the formal JCQ regulations, and I'm also obliged by the boards to deliver in-house training every year to cover new JCQ updates, but also the way that we run things at Shiplake. Every year I learn something new, and I've been doing this for a long, long time, but it means that I can always change practice and put new procedures in place. Mock exams are the perfect way for both your child and us to make sure that things are running comfortably here at Shiplake. If a child isn't comfortable, they won't ever perform at their best. So encourage them to speak to me, or by all means give me a call if you feel that something's gone wrong. I'm always happy to listen and always happy to change things. That there's nothing set in stone, well, apart from the JCQ rulings. Thank you, Judith. This is a little bit complicated. This is a seating plan. This bit up here where the pink, you have to pretend that it's going to the very bottom of the one before. As you'll all have been into the sports hall. As you go through the double doors into the sports hall, the front is here where my cursor is. There's a big screen. They won't be looking at a small board anymore. There's a big screen that has a big digital clock on it. The pink people at the very back here, they are the shortest exam, and they will always go out first. So the people at the front, the history and the design technology A level, in this particular case, this is an actual seating plan for the mock exams. They may not even know that the geography GCSE people have left. So after the geography non-extra timers that come the geography extra timers, they then go next, then the psychology. And so the longest exams will always be at the front. Rest break children. If they have a rest break, this looks quite tight of exam room, but there's 10 desks along the width of the exam, looking sort of straight forward as you go through the room. That's an awful lot of space between the desks. We have to do regulatory distances, and ours will go way beyond that. This particular candidate here is 4053, for example. He or she has supervised rest breaks, so they just need to put their hand up. Somebody will come and get them. We'll take them out of the side of the room, out of the back, to have their rest break should they wish to leave the room. If they don't, we just take their paper away from them. They sit at their desk, put their hand up, and we give them back the paper. We make a note of how long the rest break is, and we will then add that on to their time. Extra time, children have to stay, all children have to stay for the full duration of the exam. Extra time do not need to stay for their extra time. So in a 2-hour exam, say for the psychology, the extra timers don't have to stay for 2.5 hours, but they can stay up to 2.5 hours. Thank you, Judith. As Judith mentioned earlier, the alternative smaller venues are sometimes not the best place for your child. In this particular case, one of the rooms next to my office, I have a maximum of 15 desks. And as you can see there, 13 of them have already been taken. 4 separate subjects, some A-level, some GCSE. The possibility of multiple different finishing times because of the children that have got rest breaks. And I've only got 2 spare desks. This is a very, very busy room for the first day of mock exams. There could be, say, multiple. Depending on how many rest breaks there are, there could be children getting up and moving around all the time. So whilst alternative venues sounds like a good idea, it's always best, as Judith mentioned, to start them in the hall. If it doesn't work, of course we'll move them. But it's just the smaller venue is not quite as small and intimate as you might think to begin with. Thank you. So as I mentioned, malpractice, one of the most recently updated regulations, and it's always been a rule, but it's a buzzword this year, is talking candidates once they've entered the room. I have to report them when they've entered the room if they talk to each other, even if that's just turning around and saying good luck, mate, or something like that. It's not allowed. Do it outside the room, because I have no choice but to report children. And it is something that inspectors will be watching closely. An inspector, when they come in for my inspection, not Judith's especially, but for mine, they will be watching the beginning of an exam and they'll be watching the end of an exam, and they will be watching to see how the children behave. I never know when I'm getting an inspection. They literally just turn up on the morning. So the children won't know either, unfortunately. Mock papers, we'll always try to run them in exactly the same way as the formal ones. It gives a really good idea for the year 11s in January how our papers will run in the summer. Malpractice, obviously I can't report it to the board, but will be reported to heads of department and the deputy head academic, as if I was doing the real thing, and it'll be up to them what sanctions are made, and especially for persistent offenders as well. I am always available unless I'm starting an exam, and I'm always happy to talk to parents. Judith and I work very closely together. We both think it's very important to be a really tight team. So whatever procedures Judith puts in place, she passes on to me, and I put them in place in the exam room. So we do work very, very closely together. And we're always, I know Judith's the same, always happy to answer questions should you have any. And basically, finally, I just want to wish all the students best of luck sitting mock exams. They're there for a reason, and say anything that they're not happy about, they must let me know. And that's me done, I think. I'll pass you back over. I'll stop control, not that I had much in the first place, and pass you back to Judith.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And just for clarification, Lindsay did clarify it at the end that myself and Lisa Bell, we are responsible for determining eligibility for the various adjustments that can be made in exams. And Lindsay is responsible for, once we pass that information to Lindsay, to organise the logistics of the exam day. Both roles are huge, and it is a long process for both of us, but we do work together as a team. Okay, I am going to check the Q&A. I can't see any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Please type them in the Q&A or the chat function. I don't mind which one. We're happy to, both Lindsay and I, we're happy to stay online for a few more minutes to answer your questions, should you have any. I can't see any questions. So if you don't have any questions, we are not going to take any more of your time. Thank you very much for attending. I do know that a lot of parents wanted to attend the live webinar, but they are unable to due to other commitments, which is why this session was recorded, still recording, and the recording will be shared through the college's weekly bulletin. So once again, thank you for listening to us for an hour and a half. I hope that you found this session informative. If you have any questions, please contact either myself or Lindsay. Myself, if it's to do with who is eligible for what, and Lindsay, if it's to do with the logistics of the exams. So once again, thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and we wish all the students the best of luck for the mock exams. Bye.